All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. It is Tuesday, October 25th of 2022, and looks like we got a 4-game NBA slate today. I see a couple questions in the queue about NFL Showdown, so that's probably where we're going to start our day. Questions coming in after the conclusion of yesterday's showdown between the Bears and the Patriots. Really good questions. Happy to touch on these. For those of you who are new here, this is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions. Questions come in ahead of time in our Discord channel under the office hours channel. And if you are not a member of our Discord, there's a link in the description below. Highly recommend getting in there and getting your questions in, talking to members of the community. A lot of sharp people, always willing to discuss different DFS related strategies and topics. So with that being said, we're going to get it kicked off here. I'm going to get the SaberSim app pulled up, and I'm going to get our first question of the day that came in via support. Been having a lot of questions coming from support. I think it's great. The more questions we can get in, the longer these shows can be, and the more we can bring content to you guys. So first question here from support says, what are your thoughts on min uniques for a showdown slate with MME? Okay, good question. For those of you who don't know what MME is, just means mass multi-entry. So it's like your 150 maxes, your 20 maxes, like playing a lot of lineups total in a contest is basically what MME is. So we have this new min uniques feature. I was messing around with it before we jumped on, just like specifically thinking about this question because this question really got me thinking. And we've talked a lot about how just like great this tool is for lineup diversification between your lineups. And then you bring up the showdown thing, which really like kind of throws a wrench in the gears for me specifically. So I'd say like you have to kind of understand the contest type you're playing. So first and foremost, you have less players in your lineup in Showdown versus Classic. So, for this football example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players in our lineup and in Showdown. And then I believe in Classic, it is 8 position players, 9 with a defense. I could be wrong there. So let's just check really quick. That way we get a good strong answer for this. But off the bat, first thing that I want to point out is that you're going to have less players in your lineup. So for football, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 total positions. So when you're getting up to 4 or 5 min uniques, that means that 4 players can be constant in that equation. So, you take that back over to Showdown, what we're talking about. Well, if you have, 4 players constant, well, now your min uniques can basically only be 2. So, I built this 150 lineup pool for MME and a pool of 1,500, and I kind of just started playing around with it. So, if we go down to the bottom, we're going to see our 150th lineup. And then if you start cranking your min uniques, so we go to 2. Okay, we're still at 266. That's still pretty high in our pool. No need to like raise a red flag. But then as soon as we go to 3, you'll see that we don't even have enough lineups in the pool to match to make 150 lineups, and then we're already pulling like from the bottom of the barrel here. So I'd say the min uniques feature I think is great overall. I don't know. I don't think it is as useful for Showdown, or you shouldn't try and really force it as much into your Showdown process. I'd say keeping this at 1, 2 max most of the time is probably going to be like its limitation, but I don't think there's anything wrong with setting it to 2 if you do indeed want to do that. And we can kind of see what it does to our exposures here. So, if we have it at 1, we're going to get like more Leonard Fournette, more Mark Andrews. And as soon as we change this to 2, we're going to get less of both of these guys. And we're going to get more of these like lower owned captains because we're telling the builder that the lineups have to be different from each other. So I'd be really cautious using this in Showdown. You're gonna like you might end up with more lineups that you don't like. Starting to like forcing some of these $300 like tight end twos and tight end threes. So I would be really careful with this in Showdown specifically, and only use it like if you want to use it for a very particular reason. But those are my thoughts on it for Showdown specifically. I think it's a great tool for any and all classic slates. But gonna jump into the next question that kind of builds on this one. So happy to talk about these two things together. This is a question from Joe Baby Blue that came in Discord. It says, I have been tinkering with rules to try to get low-owned players. I keep looking at these top lineups, and they will have a second string running back, wide receiver, tight end, or even lower on the depth chart. How are these top players arriving at these lineup builds? Is it literally pure luck? But I feel the top players have a repeatable process that rises above everyone else. Should I try rules with at least one and add one of these less than 1% backups, maybe for only 10 to 15% of my lineups? And then a follow up from Joe Baby Blue here. Joe said, whoever won the Millionaire Maker a couple weeks ago, forgot his name. He mentioned that during his build, he eliminated all 60K lineups. What was his reasoning for this? Again, there was some back and forth, couple comments from people in the community. I'm just going to read these really quickly just to give like a little context of, just some overall strategy. So Danny Pickham said, I'd assume eliminating all the full salary lineups is done because of duplication. And then, Pete jumped in right here. And then Pete had a comment. And Pete said, if everyone plays the same lineup, then no one wins. The path to victory lies in either exactly predicting the optimal lineup, nearly impossible, or having players few others have that outperform relatively. It's easier to find these players because they have more chances than it is to find that optimal lineup. Okay, so a lot of good back and forth here in the Office Hours channel. This is the discussion we were kind of talking about, suggesting like why you get in the Discord so you can be part of these conversations, so you can read them, because there's tons of conversations that go on that I'm not reading out loud on stream here. So just a side note there. But getting back, to the question of, low owned players and, salary, et cetera, et cetera. So, the person who came on and walked through his NFL process was Max Steinberg. Max Steinberg was the SaberSim partner that took down the Millie Maker, I believe, like 2 weeks ago. If you want an in-depth review into Max's Showdown process, what I would suggest is going over to our YouTube channel. Max came on the very next day and walked through his actual process. And if you go to our channel and you go to the Office Hours playlist, so I'm going to pull that up right here. So you go to videos, you go to uploads, and you will see it. Max Steinberg joins to discuss his Millie Maker victory. Max walks through his entire Showdown process end to end and really just kind of shows you all the things that he does. He's a open book, happy to share what he does and help people in the community get better. So I would definitely check that out if you're looking to level up your Showdown game. But just for the sake of the stream, what I will say is, if you go into a build, right, and you're building for like the flagship, the Billy Maker, these large field contests, if you 150 max and then you change this to over 50K, you'll notice automatically that the max salary drops to below 50K. This is directly to combat duplication. So, there was a showdown just Sunday night between the Steelers and the Dolphins. And what happened was that the winning lineup was duplicated like over 500 times. And if you won first place, you got $837. So that is I think it was the $11. So if we just do like some quick math here. So if we do 11 times 150, it costs somebody 1650 to max out the contest. They could have won the contest and lost half of their money. That is why it is important to avoid duplication. And, SaberSim takes like the very first step for you in doing that. And the first step is to not use all the salary, use less than the max salary. So that's step one. And, Max in Max's video where he comes on and breaks it down, Max takes it a step further. He actually builds all the lineup combinations with he'll increase his max salary to 50,000, and then just to not like disrupt the organicness of the simulation, since we're using slider settings 0010 and taking single slate optimals from that. So he doesn't want to mess up the organicness of the individual simulations. So he puts this to 50K, but then he goes through and deletes all of the lineups above 48,500. I don't know if he does that for every slate. I know he did it for that specific slate. So what he'll do is he'll come in here, he'll hit salary to sort by, and then every lineup that is above 48.5, what he did was he literally just sat here and he trashed them, and then he trashed one after the other all the way down. So, that's part of his process, and he's doing that directly to combat duplication. That way, when he does win, he wins more money. And that's the point of having more unique lineups, or lineups that are less duplicated. That way, when you do get that victory, you get more of the prize pool share. So, getting back to like the question, what can you do to get some of these outcomes? I would say that, if you're playing like, I'm going to revert this back to 150. So we have our full pool of lineups. So I would say, max salary is definitely something you could play with here. It's important to keep the min salary because this is basically like a floor. You're basically telling SaberSim like, hey, don't go below this. It's like a guardrail. It's a safety net. You don't want to play. There's a fine line between being unique and playing lineups that have a incredibly small chance to win. And that is the line that you are trying to walk. You want to build lineups that still have a good chance to win, and you get like a large amount of the prize pool. There's no like formula to kind of like do that repeatedly every single time. That's what makes the game fun. That's the game theory side of it. That is what people are trying to figure out day after day. There are ways to get closer to that. And these are things that we have built into the app for people to test out and to try. So one of those tools that we've built is this aggregate rules. You can come in here, you can build lineups and limit the amount of sum ownership. Something that we like to promote is the geometric mean here. And I see a question in the queue about geometric mean, which we're going to get to after this one. But you can come in here and, if you want to try messing around with some geomean stuff, you can do that. And if you don't know where to start, Jordan and I had a 30-minute segment on Geomean explaining it like from end to end, writing down the formula to use to come up with a Geomean value that you're comfortable with. So I'm gonna show you guys where that one is at as well. So if we come over to YouTube, we have this one, product ownership and geometric mean. Jordan came on at the beginning of the episode. We did a 30-minute segment talking about Geomean. There's a Word doc with math formulas, like explaining how to use it in your own process. I would watch this. I would screenshot that. I would write that formula down so you can try and implement it into your own process. But, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is give people the tools to get some of those less duplicated lineups into their pool. And these are things that we're building into the app with the hope of accomplishing that. So I hope that, you guys can take advantage of it. Getting back to this, I just want to make sure I hit all the points here. I keep looking at these top lineups, and they will have a second string running back, wide receiver, tight end, or even lower on the depth chart. How are these players arriving at these lineup builds? Is it literally pure luck? So I'll tell you that it's probably not pure luck. They're probably using some type of combination of geometric mean, some ownership, rules, salary restrictions, and these are all things that you have the ability to test out and to try. I'll say like one rule that I use that you can see here is what I like to do is I like to come into the captains and I like to look for pass catching captains that are high owned, which is relative, but I'll say maybe like 10%. So what I'll do is like, okay, Chris Godwin is 9.9% owned. It is projected to be 9.9% owned in the captain. It is very likely that a lot of people play Chris Godwin in the captain with Tom Brady in the flex. I know this. They're highly correlated. You can come in here and see the correlation. Chris Godwin has a huge positive correlation with Tom Brady. Usually positive correlation in showdown leads to players being more commonly used together. I know this. I think a lot of people understand this concept. So what I like to do is I like to come in here and I'll build a rule, and it'll be like a group rule. And I'll say, if I use at least two players from this primary player pool, it's usually like a pass catcher and their quarterback, that I want to use at least one player under a threshold that I determine. Sometimes it's by projected points. Sometimes I want a guy whose projected points are, I don't know, less than 5. Sometimes it's somebody whose ownership is like less than 20. And you could get crazy. Like you could do all types of things. You could say, use 2 players less than 20, use 2 players less than 25, use 1 player less than 5. Like you could do all of these different things to try and make sure you're getting lineup combinations that are less likely to be duplicated. And in turn, these are the players that you are talking about, Joe, like these are the lineup combinations or the players that you're probably seeing people kind of getting to these constructions. So, I would check out the Geomean discussion with me and Jordan. I would recommend, coming in here. You can mess with rules. You can mess with aggregate rules, player rules, group rules, whatever you want. The rule I just showed you is like one that I've started to mess around with and use since we added the lineup rules feature. I think it's a good starting point. And, I would just say, remember that like positive correlation probably leads to players being used in lineups more often together. So as like a showdown tip, that's my best showdown tip, is that, where you see positive correlation. And like, that's why we don't build correlation into showdown. We leave it neutral. I think this is the best way for it. I think that you could even try and do things where, you try and get negative correlations. So, find a player where like maybe you want to have so many lineups where Chris Godwin and Tom Brady are not in the same lineup. And one way to do that is with our filters. So you can come in here, we can filter by Chris Godwin, and we could see how many Chris Godwin lineups we have where Tom Brady is in the lineup. And, this is like really cool to look at. So out of the 15 lineups that we have Chris Godwin, only 5 have Tom Brady. So that means that there's 10 lineups where we are playing Chris Godwin in the captain with no quarterback. And I think that's like really, really good to see that, SaberSim is able to like find those lineups, mostly because we're taking single game simulations and building your lineup with the literal optimals from a single sim. So there's going to be sims where, Chris Godwin gets there and Tom Brady doesn't. And SaberSim can go in and find those, and, SaberScore will grade it and put it in your lineup accordingly. based on, the upside of that lineup. I'm not saying that, SaberSim is like calculating duplication. It's not, but it's mostly like solving for optimals. And I could just say that, our simulations are really good at taking like a large sample of running a game thousands and thousands of time and finding these lineups. So that's my best advice on, trying to get more unique. And we'll kind of move on from there. I'm going to jump around a little bit just because we're kind of talking about Geomean. I wanted to hit this question from Danny Pickham. Danny had a question here about Geomean. So since we're talking about it, we're just going to keep rolling. And he said, if we use Geomean, I'm assuming we should get rid of ownership fade. Seems like it would be double dipping and reaching. Okay, Danny, I think this is a really good question. To be honest, I don't know where I fall on the topic. I do kind of want to talk to some other members of the team, specifically Matt. If Matt's around, maybe Matt can throw some thoughts in the chat. What I'll say is that, I think that Geomean rules are used best in sports like Showdown, like MMA, sports where duplication is a factor. And what you'll see, like especially for Showdown, is that, in line with what you're saying, ownership fade is turned off. I don't know if that's the case for MMA. We can go and see. So it looks like we have a 10 fight card coming up this weekend. No projections. So let's go back to this last weekend's. We had a 14 card fight. And, if we come in here and so for something like this, there is like quite a bit of ownership fade. So I think your question is really relevant for MMA specifically if you're trying to solve for that. So what I'll do is I'll take this question back to the team and kind of see where we fall on, balancing ownership rules in the aggregate section versus balancing ownership fade. I think it's like a really sharp question and something that is worth like asking and getting a good solid answer to. So I don't want to kind of just give like too many thoughts on something that I think is like a big question and a good answer is needed on it. So let me follow up on this one tomorrow. I'll start off the stream by getting an answer to this question, and then we'll keep going from there. But always good when you guys stump me. It means the question was a really, really good question, and I'll need to think about it a little further. So we're going to keep moving. Got this question from Larson. Larson said, FanDuel cash question, is there a setting I can apply to my cash builds that keeps multiple players from the same team appearing in my builds besides a QB wide receiver or QB tight end stack? I was trying to use lineup rules to do this, but I'm not sure exactly how. Okay, so Larson, I was messing around with this before I jumped on the stream. I do have a solution for you here. So I'm going to walk you through it right now. We're just going to do this on the Thursday to Monday slate really quickly here. So, what Larson is asking is like, hey, I don't want to use more than two players from the same team unless it's a QB and the wide receiver or the tight end. So what I would do is I would come in here and I would create a rule, and I would say a stack rule, a basic, and I would say no more than one. And what I would do is I would uncheck QB and I would just make it the position players. So running back, wide receiver, tight end. So that's going to say, no more than one player from any team that is only a position player. Then you would save that. You would create a second rule. And what I would also say is because you said, no, it seems like you don't want the QB with the running back only. You only want it with the running wide receiver or the tight end. So I would create a second rule. And then I would say no more than one again. And then this time I would only check the QB and the running back. And then I would save that. So we have these two rules here. So what you do is if you come in here, you build for cash, and then we're going to run this build. What we should see is basically really small QB stacks. So either like no QB stack, QB plus one, maybe QB +2, and then that's it. No run backs. And then we'll check our secondary stacks and see what those look like as well. But let's see what we're getting here. So first thing I want to do is I want to check the stack types. So, okay, we're getting to a lot of no QB stacks, which is fine for cash. And then we're getting to QB +1s and QB +2s. So if we were to start like spot checking this, and then we could check our secondaries too. So we have no more than a secondary with 2 players from the same team. So I think that like goes a little bit against what you were asking for, because we're ending up with Brandon Cooks and Damian Pierce. It could be because they are no, it's not because he's in the flex. So it looks like this rule prevented the QB stacks from being like more than QB +2s, but we're not getting any QBs paired with a running back. So that solves that problem. We are getting these 2 stacks, so I don't know why we're getting that. Let's go back and let's see if we can figure this out. So we're saying no more than 1. Okay. Larson, I thought I had this solved earlier. Not really sure. I'll respond to you in Discord. I'll look at this after the stream and see if I could come up with a set of rules that satisfies your requirement. So let me look at this a little further and I'll get back to you. But not going to go too much further with this one since it appears I'm having a little trouble meeting it. But nevertheless, we'll get back to you. Okay. Next question here from Straight Out of Canton says, if you perform a build before the last SaberSim sim is completed and then refresh projections after it's done, will it change your lineups from the original build? I didn't have this lineup yesterday when I entered DK contests, but upon review today, it is showing up. Okay, really good question here. So I'm going to go back to, we'll say like NBA. And because I think I ran a build earlier for this. Okay, so I ran this NBA build at 1:58 p.m. Sims have run since then at 2:05 p.m. What's going to happen is that SaberSim is going to look at the new projections and then resort your lineups based on the latest information. So it is very likely that if you go into a build at, a couple hours ago, you build your lineups, and then you come back, SaberSim will probably have resorted your lineups based on the latest and greatest information. If you want to see what you did earlier, what you do is you hit this load saved lineups, and then you go back to whatever set that you had before. So this first set, the 158.34 here, is the original set. This 159.02 is the last time I made any changes. If you make changes and you don't hit this save button, but you leave and go somewhere else, SaberSim will automatically save the last set of changes that you made. So if you want to go and see whatever you had previously, all you have to do is hit this load save lineups and pick the last timestamp on here. And then if you pick the earliest one, that'll be the original set before you made any exposure changes, etc., like that. So just know that that is how you do it. If you want to get back to the latest and greatest, all you have to do is just refresh one more time. I'm pretty sure. So that is how you do that. And let me know if you have any follow-up there. Straight Out of Canton. Going to hit this next question here from AB Smooth. Question is, pulling it up in chat. For NBA, do you ever run a cash build to see what is roughly the optimal projected lineup for the day? And do you ever pay attention to your lineups in your pool to make sure you are not going crazy far away from that with some lineups, or does SaberSim take care of that naturally? Okay, really good question here. So what I'll say is that, I like to run a cash build for a couple different reasons. One reason is I like to see the players that are coming up in the cash builds a lot. Sometimes I think that could lead to more ownership. As an example, for NFL, just this past weekend, Josh Jacobs was like one of the top cash plays of the week. We had his ownership projected at about like 30%. That's kind of what he was projected at across the industry. If you looked at his ownership in the DraftKings Millie Maker, he came in at like 45%. So I think that intuitively, this is like very subjective, anecdotal, um, like value plays that come up a lot in cash. I think that it is safe to assume that their ownership can come in higher than what we are projecting them for. So that's like one thing there. I think that you can run cash builds to kind of get an idea of where you think ownership might be, like where ownership might be going for a certain slate. I also think that it is okay to run a cash build, look at the projected scores of the lineups in that build and say something like, okay, about like uh this projected score is like maybe somewhere I should try and make sure I don't get too far away from. I don't think you have to do that at all. I think SaberSim is really good at balancing correlation, ownership, and upside, and getting you lineups that have a lot of potential to have really high scores. The only place I could see that being an issue is like if you are making a lot of changes and going really far into your pool. If you have like a 1,500 lineup build and you are looking at lineups like 14.99 and those like really low lineups in your pool, I think it's okay to spot check the projected score of those lineups and see if they're not too far from the number that you determine to be a safe slash like good number to kind of be a baseline. So, I'd say like it's more of a concern the deeper into your pool you go, but I think overall lineups in like the top half of your pool are going to be really good lineups. And we just like SaberSim is not a traditional optimizer. It's not just packing in the most projected points and then the next most projected points. It's really trying to find upside lineups that have good correlation components and good ownership fade components. SaberSim is taking a lot of this into account, so I wouldn't think about it too much. I would just be a little careful the deeper you go into your pool. Maybe do some spot checking in that scenario. So really good question, AB Smooth. That's my 2 cents on it. Okay, question here from Danny Pickham. Danny said, most efficient way to get a game stack of 2 studs in NBA. Okay, so if you are looking to game stack, what I would say is you could do a couple different things. So, one, we have a game stacks tab. You can use this and say, use like minimum 2 players. There's no salary component to this, but this is one way to game stack. We're just going to kind of run through the different ways. Another thing you could do is that you could use like the team stacks tab, and then this drop down, you can pair it with any team you want. So, this is just like a note of different ways to get specific team combinations in your lineups. You could do Detroit with, Golden State. I want, 2 players, something like that. So another way to do it. The best way to accomplish what you are trying to do is to use rules. So what I would do is I would create like a group rule, and I would probably manually put these guys in. So if I want to do a game where I have Steph Curry and Devin Booker, so I would just do like Booker and Curry in a manual group, and I would do use at least 2. And then I would save that. And then that way, these players are always going to come up together. This will put them in 100% of your lineups. Another thing you could do is you could use an if-then rule. So it's saying, if I use Steph Curry, then I want to use Devin Booker. I like this way better because you're not forcing the builder to put Steph Curry into your lineups. You're saying, hey, in simulation outputs where Steph Curry is in my lineup, I also want to have Devin Booker in there. So you're not forcing the exposure to Steph Curry. You're letting the exposure get there a little more naturally, organically. But like what you're saying is like, okay, now that Steph Curry is in this, now I want to be opinionated. Now put Devin Booker in there because I want the game stack. You're not saying like you really want Steph Curry in your lineups. You're saying that I want a game stack of 2 studs. So I would use an if-then rule. I think it's like the most organic way of not forcing it in too much, but still accomplishing what you want. So that's how I would do it. Let me know if you have any questions. Another way, if this was like a large slate and you were trying to do it, you could do a group auto rule, and it's saying like, if I use at least one player from a game, and you can add a stat requirement, and you could say, usually like quote unquote studs, or have like a high projection or a high salary. So whatever way you determine it, we're going to stick with the Booker Curry situation. So it's like, if at least one player whose projected points is greater than 40, then I want to use at least one player from the same game whose projected points is also 40. So this is another option to game stack. And I would recommend using this on the larger slate. That way you don't have to go into every single game and do the same rule. So this is what I think is the best way to do it. And then, see, it'll create a rule for each and every game. And then if you save it as a manual rule, you can come in here, you can hit this drop down, and then you can open up any single one of these rules and see who the players are. So it's saying if I use Devin Booker, then I got to use Steph Curry. If I use Steph Curry, then I have to use Devin Booker. It covers it both ways. You could decide, if you're like okay with this. For some teams, see, like this rule won't apply for Shy because there's no one on the opposite team who matches the criteria. So you can kind of spot check the games, the players, and just be a little more deliberate. If you save it as a manual rule, you're okay with whatever you're seeing, you can go back and save it as an auto rule. So those are my thoughts there. A lot of different ways to accomplish this task. Hope that was helpful. All right. I see a question here from John Stanger, and we're going to hit this. Looks like it is 2 questions. So we'll just go one at a time here. First question from John is question 1 for MME. How do you treat the player exposures in the middle range? I feel like I spend most of my time lowering exposures at the top end to minimize risk and bumping up exposures at the low end, but I feel like I never know what to do as much with players in the middle range, if that makes sense. Okay, really good question, John. I'm glad you bring this up. So, the way that I feel about this is that, at the end of the day, I think that, like I'll speak for myself, I signed up for SaberSim because I trust the tools. I think the tools are good. I think that a lot of work goes into them that I don't have to do. So paying for the service is very, very helpful in a lot of ways. So, we always say like SaberSim is your advisor, and SaberSim does all of the hard work for you. That way you don't have to do it. I think that for the most part, it's important to like trust whatever tool you're using and kind of be like the quality control of the tool. Like that's kind of your job is to like check the tool, spot check, make adjustments where you see fit, manage risk, and let the tool do what it's made for, and save you time. So what I like to do is I like to pick a few spots on any given slate, like no more than like five to like less than 10, like less than 10 spots where I think that, I can like add value, or I can manage my risk, or whether it be like via exposure changes, min uniques, projection adjustments. And I like to like keep those things to a small number for the most part. And, a lot of the times that does come like at the top of the spectrum and at the low end of the spectrum, because you're mostly trying to control the outliers, like whether somebody is too far of an outlier where you're not getting enough exposure to them, or where somebody is too much of an outlier where you're getting too much exposure to them. And you're kind of managing those sides of the spectrum, and you're really letting SaberSim like handle the meat of the work in the middle. And I think it's like okay to do that. So like my answer to the question is, I pretty much let SaberSim take care of all of those players in the middle for me. I focus on the outliers. I focus on risk management, I focus on, okay, is something weird on either end of the spectrum, and really let SaberSim do the bulk of the work for me. I think it's okay to like spot check your exposures in a build for the middle of your, exposure set, going through here and kind of, if you want to look at like some of these players in the middle, I'll say that, for the most part, they're in here for a reason. So I would say, try and, trust whatever tool you're using. Obviously it's SaberSim in this scenario, and just let SaberSim be an advisor, kind of do a lot of the dirty work for you. And a lot of that comes in the bulk in that middle section that you're talking about. So that's my thoughts. Let me know if you have any follow-up there. All right. Question 2 says from John here. Gonna throw it in the chat. All right. Question 2. Also, I feel like I make less changes to the inputs right now for NBA compared to NFL. For NFL, I generally know what stacks and types of lineups I want going into the slate. But for NBA, I feel that I currently have less that I'm looking for. Not that that's necessarily bad. Any advice on things to look for in NBA, since stacks and correlation aren't nearly as important as in NFL? Okay. I think it's totally normal for you to like, this to be your process, mostly because, for NFL, all of the work is like really done up front. Inactives, 90 minutes to game time, who the starters are supposed to be, and there's not like a lot of late breaking news really close to lock or even thereafter lock. There's only like one late swap window, and there's usually like only a couple games, and even then it might be only like 1 to 3 players that news is pending for. So I would say that, a lot of the work for NFL comes up front, so it's totally normal. In NBA, a lot of the news breaks after lock, so being around to late swap is the biggest edge you can have. So it's pretty normal to not do a lot of work up front, and then your work that you do gets spread out throughout the night, late swapping, watching news, um, keeping up with your lineups in the standings and things like that, and trying to capitalize on that. So I think like overall, it's just kind of a different game with a different process that needs to be taken in order to be profitable, i.e. late swap. So I think it's like totally normal. I know a lot of people don't do like a ton of work up front, and what they'll even do is, they'll come into a slate and on like a bigger slate, they'll even like backload their lineups to try and take more advantage of late swap. So, for a 8 to 10 game NBA slate, if there's only like one 4 p.m. game, like I know people that'll come in here and exit off and say, no, I want to take as much advantage of late swap with news that's pending in the later games, and almost do less work up front. So I think it's totally normal. Let me know if you have any more questions on that one. And we're going to move on to this next question from TBK here. TBK said, good afternoon. Quick question for NBA DFS for a competitive advantage on FanDuel. Do you think it's best to fade Kristaps Porzingis? He's currently at 75% owned. Okay, we could float over here to FanDuel and see what's going on. So I'll say that, right off the bat, I don't like the concept of fading just to fade. I would say, like, if you're gonna do an action in one direction or the other, have a reason for that, whether it's running a research build and listening to SaberSim and SaberSim telling you that, hey, this is not a good play, or yeah, this person's like a really good play. I would say that, 75% or 69% now since the update sounds like a lot, but sometimes that's not even enough. I think there were plenty of slates last year. Joel Embiid gets rolled out. Andre Drummond is his backup at super low price. Drummond comes in at like 90% and crushes. It was probably more optimal for him to be owned at 95%, like 98%. Who knows? He's just in such a smash spot that, I wouldn't let like a high ownership number simply just due to the actual like number itself turn you off from playing a play. I think that you should, do some slate research, run some research builds, run some test builds, and kind of determine if this player is indeed paying off his ownership, like is projected to be like that high optimal. So, don't fade on the essence of what I'm trying to say is don't fade ownership just to fade ownership. Ownership in NBA is a very well projected sport. Usually ownership is warranted. It's up to you to take those extra steps to try and figure out if ownership, if a player's value is fragile, like we talked about yesterday, or if they can indeed like pay off this ownership. So a lot of questions on that lately. Happy to continue to talk about it and touch on it. But those are my thoughts there on Porzingis. All right. Got a question here from Johnny Mo, and going to throw this in the chat here. So Johnny Mo said, I have a question about the early morning projections for NBA. Assuming no injuries listed and no injury news appear for a team during the day, will the early morning projections around 8 a.m. Eastern be about the same as the projections right before the game start? For example, say there was no lineup news for a team or their opponent. Player A is projected for 25.5 points. Is there any reason for that number to be projected at 22 or 28 points right before tip-off with no new lineup news? I know there are small adjustments as the sims get rerun during the day and adjust stats by a tenth or hundredth, but are there any scenarios where we would see any adjustment by a couple of points from the early morning sims? Okay, good question, Johnny Mo. And what I will say is that what I would recommend is, don't build your lineups in the morning if that is where this question is leading. I would highly suggest not doing that. If you want to just throw in a placeholder, I think that's totally okay. But I would highly encourage you, if you're not going to have the time to be around closer to lock, skip a slate. Like, honestly, it's negative EV to set lineups in the morning and then not return to them until like after slate or after slate locks, etc. So that's the first note. Second note is that I think that, for the sake of your question, let's say no news comes out, which it always seems like news does come out. So this seems like a fringe case, but I would like be cautious of like those initial projections. What we've talked about, I think a user suggested this, is that we add like a column here that says like, initial projection, and then you can like compare that to the updated SaberSim projections as the night goes on. So you could see who's changing from their initial projection. I think that we wouldn't want to put out an initial projection in a column prior to, I'd say, on a typical slate that starts at 7 Eastern, maybe like 3 Eastern, like 4 hours before lock, I think is like safe to say that the sims are like probably closer to what they will be toward the end of the slate. I'd say even like 2 hours before, you should start to feel really comfortable with the projections that you're seeing. So maybe like 5 Eastern. I really wouldn't. I don't think I don't think the projections are bad early in the morning. I just think the projections are better closer to lock. And I'm not saying that you have to start your process, 10 minutes to lock when the final sim runs. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, around noon Eastern, around, 2 Eastern, you should feel like really comfortable with the lineups with the projections that you're seeing. And I think this initial projection column is something that we're going to be adding in the future. So I saw Johnny Mo had a couple questions here. Said, just posted a question in the Office Hours Discord channel. Username is Johnny Mo. Love these Office Hours, by the way. Thank you. And then I saw that you had a follow-up here. By the way, the question was more geared towards betting softer early morning player props instead of building DFS lineups with the early morning sims. Okay, so didn't know that. Thank you for the context. As far as the DFS conversation goes, I'm sure that's like really helpful for some people still. I would still think that, around like noon Eastern is like a safer time to kind of like try and look at the stats. So, if for today, for instance, if I were to go like into the lineup alerts channel, it seems like we ran a couple sims around 3:30 Eastern, and then ran a couple sims around like 4:30 Eastern as news is coming out. I would say, like a word of advice, maybe try and target teams that have less questionable players overall. So like, regardless of pending news, if there's no news to start with, then I think that, that's probably a better place to start. But I still think like 3 p.m. Eastern is like a good spot to probably start diving into some of the statistics, and you should feel a lot more comfortable with them around that time for a standard slate like tonight. 4 hours pre-lock seems pretty safe to me. So those are my thoughts. Gonna hit the next question we got here. Happy to talk about some betting stuff, and looking forward to doing some prop betting myself. All right, got a question here from Rough 'em Up. If I build with ownership at 0 once I'm post build is sorting by SaberScore, still taking into consideration ownership for the sorting. So really good question, Rough 'em Up. We had a similar question last week in regards to golf. So what I will say is, talking about, just giving some context. Rough 'em Up's basically asking like, hey, if I build with ownership turned off, is SaberScore still looking at my sum ownership, my product ownership, my Geomean? To be honest, I don't know whether it is or not. The way the ownership fade slider works, particularly, is it is judging players based on the ownership at their position. So it's taking Nicholas Batum and then comparing his ownership to other players at the ownership at his position. I don't know. I know that SaberScore is grading lineups based on the ownership, like an ownership metric. I'm assuming it's a lineup ownership metric, but I will take this one back to the team as well. I don't want to give out any false advice or say something that's not true, and then you miss the next stream where I correct it, and then you don't know you have the wrong answer in your head. I don't want to do that to anybody. So I will follow up on this question as well, rough them up, and touch on it at the beginning of tomorrow's stream. So another good question. Guys are continuing to stump me today. Happy to get back to you on all of these awesome questions. Really sharp. You guys are keeping me on my toes. So gonna move through here. Got a question from Demetrius. What exposures do you recommend for tonight? I'd say, on a 4-game slate, Demetrius, it's okay to be a little more concentrated and take some strong stands on particular players. So, something I like to do is like look at the ownerships that SaberSim's giving me, compare those to my pool exposures. If you're in any single build, what if you see the exposure of the number of lineups that you have here? If you scroll over to the right, you'll see this pool ownership column. It's how often this player comes in the entire pool of 500 lineups or 1,500 lineups for that matter. I think it's a good idea to kind of keep that in mind. But I would say don't be afraid to take some strong stands on a quote unquote smaller slate overall. All right. Question here from Uncrabby Cabby. Hey, Andrew, how do you determine which type of roster constructions will give you the most leverage versus the field for NBA? Okay. Good question here. So, what you can do. One thing that I'll say is that I don't think that stack types are as like quote unquote important in a sport like NBA as opposed to like NFL or like baseball, where you're like trying to compound that correlation, especially in baseball. NBA is a lot different. Usually if you have two high salary guys on the same team, if one is scoring, that's taking away shots and opportunities from the other person on the team, as opposed to baseball. Every time a guy gets a hit, it gives every other player 1/9 more at bats in the entire game. So what I will say is that, something that Max talked about when Max did his stream with Jordan is setting a rule to have no more than 3 players on a team. So that would be a rule like this: no more than 3 players from the same team. And that's basically because, there's not enough fantasy points to go around for 3 players more often than not, unless they're like all really cheap. I think you take that on a slate by slate basis. I know the Pelicans are missing Zion, Ingram, and Herbert Jones tonight. So we're going to see like probably more value out of the Pelicans. You could try and, mess around with this rule, set it to 4, set it to 3, see what type of constructions you're getting. I would always encourage you to come in here and check the stack types that you're seeing to see if you have like a lot of 3 stacks or 4 stacks if you don't have a rule. So just remember that too much correlation is not your friend in basketball specifically, and we can see that, in the range of outcomes. So if I were to pick a team, maybe Phoenix, and we have Devin Booker, and he's most negatively correlated to the next highest salary person, next projected person, which is indeed Chris Paul. And like, that's kind of exactly what we're talking about. So I'd say like more often than not, you don't want too many players from the same team in basketball. I think 3 is like a good number to make a cutoff point at. It seems to be like a decent heuristic overall. So those are my thoughts there. And gonna keep rolling here. I see a comment from John. I think I need to remember to check min uniques more often and see how it affects my lineups. I would definitely remember that. I know it's a new feature. Got to just slowly work it into your process. Something I like to do is I like to write down my process end to end, because I think it's like really easy to forget steps, or you add new steps, so then other steps get lost in your memory bank. I think it's important to have like a process that is repeatable. And in order to have a repeatable process for me, I like to write down the steps. That way I know I'm taking the same steps over and over. Checking min uniques would be a line on my process step list. That way I make sure I don't miss it. So that's basically what I do. I think it helps me a lot. All right. Question here from Brad. Question: if I build with ownership at 0. I think this is the same question from Rough 'em Up. Question: if I build with ownership at 0 when it's sourced by SaberScore, is it still taking in consideration ownership for the sorting? Maybe Brad is Rough 'em Up, and he posted it in 2 places. So if you're 2 different people, I'll get back to both of you tomorrow, I promise. But I'm going to definitely take that one back to the team. Comment here from John. Oh, this was in regards to the prop betting. All right. So, okay. Brad said, yes, I am Rough 'em Up. Okay, good to know. So yeah, no, already touched on that one. I see one more question here from Steven, everybody. This is the last question in the queue for today. If you have any more questions you want me to get to, get them in now. I'm going to hit this question from Steven and we'll see what is remaining. Okay. Steven said, newbie question, can you CSV edit your lines on FanDuel and DK via mobile? So Steven, the answer to your question is yes, you can access the site on mobile. So, I can't really like display it here for you, but if you go and log in on mobile, you should still be able to access the entry editor. And from the entry editor, you can download your entries file and then upload it to DraftKings or FanDuel using your phone. We have tutorials about how to do this if you go to settings, you go to help. And I'm going to pull this up really quickly over here. 1 second. So I'm going to put my screen up. All right. You should see these are our sabersim.com/support. If you go down here to view more, you can type in a search bar up at the top. And then you could say entering on mobile. And then if you do that, so how can I get my lineups into my contests on DraftKings on my phone? And then how can I get my lineups into my contests on FanDuel on my phone? So if you click on these, we have videos and we have just like a transcript tutorial about how to do this. So the video will walk you through it end to end. And then I'm going to look at the FanDuel one really quickly. But basically, we kind of take you guys through it step by step, how to do it on both. You see, like, clearly a mobile device. And so these transcripts and videos should help you out getting your entries in on mobile. Couple comments here. Make sure to do it on a browser on mobile and not in the DK app. Yes. So it has to be, either like on Safari or Google Chrome. I know that if you use DuckDuckGo, you might have issues downloading the file. So I would recommend, like, either I use Safari myself. I'm a iPhone guy, so Safari tends to work just fine for me. So I would check out the tutorials here, and if you have any follow up, you guys can reach out to support@sabersim.com, and we're happy to help out any way we can with issues like this. So that being said, everybody, that was our last question. Haven't seen any more questions come in. Had a full stream today. Happy to answer any and all questions. We'll be right back here tomorrow. And if you're not signed up with us, there is a link below to a 7-day, no strings attached, free trial for SaberSim. Get in on the action. Best time of the year for DFS. Until tomorrow, good luck in your contest tonight, and I will see you all then. Take care.